All right, here we go. Recording Friday. So I'm not going to take too much of your time. I'm going to get out of here as quickly as I can as well. But I'm going to go ahead and share screen. We have. Okay, share screen. We have learning today. Okay, and that's mostly our conditioning stuff. Okay, so hopefully you can kind of see this here. But AP Psych. No, review number 4, learning, conditioning, behaviorism, learning. Okay, quick definition there. A relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of experience. Okay, it's probably something internal or external that has changed that experience, to where you gain some kind of understanding. Tabula rasa, remember that is John B. Watson. He thinks everybody is born a blank slate, and when you're born a blank slate, you are taught to be funny, or you are taught to be intelligent, or you are taught to be athletic, that you are essentially conditioned to be who you are. And Watson claimed to tabula rasa that he could take any newborn kid and turn them into whatever he wanted, a rocket scientist or a classical musician, whatever. Learning involves 2 associations. It's either going to be classical or operant conditioning. And for behaviorism, behaviorists, they believe that learning must be examined through observable behaviors. So classical conditioning, that's Pavlov, that's Watson. Those are making paired associations. Okay, so the official definition is associating a neutral stimulus, which is something essentially natural, with an unconditioned stimulus, again, essentially something, not necessarily that brings about any kind of change, in order to form a conditioned response. Okay, and we'll get into some of these examples in a second. Extinction, that's when the conditioned response goes away. Okay, so if that association is weak, or if that association is not consistently reinforced, then whatever that conditioned response is, whatever that behavior is, it will eventually go away. Oftentimes, the subject in classical conditioning is not knowingly participating. Their behavior is involuntary. Like Pavlov's dog wasn't deciding to salivate at the sound of the bell. Watson, little Albert, that little kid wasn't deciding to cry at the sight of the white rabbit. And Dwight from The Office, he wasn't deciding to salivate or dry mouth at the sound of the computer. Okay, so Watson, little Albert. Albert was conditioned to be scared of the white furry. He did a series of animals, but the white furry rabbit, because he associated that rabbit with a loud banging sound that scared him. So the neutral stimulus was the white furry animal. Okay, it's natural. Here it is. There's an animal. It doesn't make him cry. It's neutral. The unconditioned stimulus is a big bang, a loud sound. Okay, the conditioned response was crying at the sight of the white furry animal. So what did Watson do? He would pair the white furry bunny with a loud bang sound that would produce an outburst of cry from little Albert. So over time, every time little Albert saw the white furry bunny, a loud bang would happen, and it would scare the little guy. Okay, and so over time, repetition, Albert paired this white rabbit, with an anticipating a loud sound coming, and it would cause him to cry at the sight of the bunny. Pavlov's dog was conditioned to salivate at the sound of a bell. The neutral stimulus was the bell. The unconditioned stimulus was the food, and the conditioned response was the salivating at the sound of the bell. So every time this dog was fed, they would ring a bell. And over time, the dog only salivated at the sound of a bell after this experiment had been done. Okay, so the first time you ring a bell, boom, no salivating. But if you pair that bell with the dog food, or with a juicy steak, or with the smell, the aroma of food, if you pair those together, then it will produce the conditioned response. So when you ring the bell, the dog is anticipating food is coming. The dog doesn't want to salivate at the sound of the bell. The dog is salivating because it anticipates food coming. Stimulus generalization. Remember, that is when you can't really tell the difference between a white rabbit, a white cat, a white rat. And so the sight of any of those white furry animals would cause little Albert to cry. Discrimination is when you can tell the difference. Okay, so Pavlov's dog salivated at the sound of a bell, but it didn't salivate at the sound of a whistle. It did not salivate at the sound of a chime or something like that. Okay, with little Albert, it did not it did not cry at the sight of a white cat, because a white cat is different than a white rabbit. Okay, or extinction is when it goes away, misspelled that there. Extinction is when the condition response goes away. It hadn't been conditioned or reinforced enough. Spontaneous recovery is once something goes away, it all of a sudden comes back. And acquisition is when you acquire, when you actually gain the conditioned response. In classical conditioning, the response, this behavior, the salivation, the crying, that is typically involuntary. Okay, the subject doesn't consciously decide to do the conditioned response. Okay, it doesn't have control over that anymore. It's involuntary. Operant conditioning, that's from people like B.F. Skinner and Edward Thorndike. Now we're talking about reinforcement and punishment. Okay, so the subject is much more likely to be knowingly participating in this process in conditioning. They're somewhat in charge of their behavior, okay, their response. Behavior is reinforced through reinforcement and punishment. Okay, so you can have positive reinforcement or you can have positive punishment. Positive reinforcement, you're adding something pleasant, a gold star, a pay raise, okay? Or positive punishment, you're adding something unpleasant. You're adding a spanking, okay? You're adding chores to somebody. You're adding an extra shift to somebody's schedule, okay? Negative reinforcement is you're removing something that is unpleasant, okay? So negative reinforcement is still good. So you did something and good, you passed a quiz or whatever, and I negatively enforce you by removing homework, okay? Negative punishment would be removing something pleasant, okay? So if you get in trouble, I remove your phone. If you get in trouble in class, I remove your recess time. Okay, so positive, you are adding something. Negative, you are subtracting something. Thorndike had that puzzle, that maze, and he would put an animal in there, a rat or a cat or whatever. He'd put an animal in there to solve the maze. Okay, and if they solved the maze, they got a piece of cheese. They got some kind of food. And every time you put the animal back in there, they would learn. They would learn from their mistakes. They would learn from their experiences, and they worked hard at learning, at getting through the maze faster because they wanted that positive reinforcement. They wanted that food at the end. Okay. Over time, he kind of makes the box a little bit more complex, and he would put buttons in there. And every now and then, when the rat would come across a button, it could press this button and food would pop out. Okay, and it learned to look for buttons as well. B.F. Skinner box, you guys probably remember that. Operant conditioning chamber is what it's also kind of called. He would put the lab rat in there, and the lab rat would just kind of poke around until it came across a lever, and it would pull that lever, and it pulled that lever, out comes cheese. And so the desired behavior was to get rats to pull on these levers and press buttons and stuff like that. And over time, the lab rats would figure that out, and they would learn quicker, and they would do this in a more timely manner. They learned, right? They learned from their experiences, and they were trained by positive reinforcement. He also used positive punishment. If a rat went the wrong way, or if a rat went to a certain part of the cage, it would get shocked. There would be an electrical shock. The rat didn't like that. It didn't want that to happen. And so how did the rat fix its behavior? Well, it stayed away from that electric shock area. It did not want that positive punishment, that shock. So it changed its behavior. It stopped walking to that side of the cage. I thought it was kind of cool from their video. Conditioning can lead to certain disorders, such as anxiety and stress and phobias and social anxiety disorders. Just think about little Albert, right? He probably gained a fear of certain animals, a fear of white furry animals, okay? Because he was sent to crying every time he saw one. Because conditioning can create some of these disorders, it can also be reversed. It can also resolve them, okay? So learning conditions can also be unlearned, okay? Learning certain conditions can also be unlearned. So if you learn to be stressed in certain situations, if you learn to have phobias, if you learn to have panic attacks in certain situations, it is theoretically, you can unlearn that behavior as well. Okay, you can use counter conditioning. This helps, to unlearn conditioned responses. Okay, so little Albert had a phobia of rats. He was terrified of rats. Every time he saw this white rat, it would cry. So now what you have to do is you have to pair that rat with something, or rabbit, sorry, you have to pair that rabbit with something pleasant. Okay, so instead of pairing it when you march it out there, making a loud banging sound. Instead of that, pair it with cookies. Every time the white rabbit comes in, you also bring cookies for him, okay? Or a fun song comes on a speaker, or every time the white rabbit comes into the room, so does somebody with a big box of toys, okay? And over time, it's possible to counter condition to reverse that phobia. Operant conditioning, the difference. Okay, the difference there is you're associating pairing a behavior with a consequence. Okay, so getting back to that, punishments weaken undesired behaviors. If you don't want people to do something, you add a punishment. If they have bad behavior, add a punishment. Okay, and that will weaken their undesired behaviors. Reinforcements strengthen desired behaviors. If you want people to continue doing a good job at work, positively reinforce them. If you want people to be a good student, right, and to get their work done, negatively reinforce them. Okay, remove an assignment. Okay, remove a seating chart. Okay, let kids sit where they want. So reinforcement strengthens desired behaviors. We get in the schedules here. Remember, a fixed schedule, the advantage there is that it's faster for learning. Learning will happen faster. You're giving people, students, whatever, a predictable schedule. They know when they're going to be reinforced. So they know every time I finish an assignment, I'm going to get points. Every time I finish an assignment, I'm going to get recess. Okay. It's the fastest way to acquisition. It's the fastest way to learning. Interval is X amount of time or X amount of time durations. Okay, so they know at the end of every week they can get a prize if they had good behavior. Okay, so instead of getting that prize every day, they know, hey, by the end of the week I've got to do a good job so I can get some kind of positive reinforcement. Variable is unpredictable. Okay, you don't know what the schedule is going to be. It's not faster for learning because you're not getting reinforced every rep, but because you don't know when reinforcement is coming, you might try hard when you are trying, or it might stick out when you do get reinforced. Okay, so extinction is less likely. So reinforcement happens after an unpredictable number of reps. That's ratio. Or reinforcement happens after an unpredictable time interval. Okay, so that's your interval. So variable would be most resistant to extinction. It's most resistant to forgetting because in theory, learning happens more long-term because you're more intrinsically motivated. Okay, you're not always waiting on reinforcement because you don't know when it's going to come. Behaviors in operant conditioning are voluntary. Behaviors in classical conditioning are involuntary. Thorndike and his law of effect, responses that produce a satisfying effect are more likely to be repeated in similar situations and vice versa. Okay, so when good things happen, you will continue to try to do good things because you were it felt good, right? It was a satisfying effect for you. So when you try really hard in school, you know, and you get good grades, you're going to continue trying hard in school. Okay, when you did a good job at work, you're going to continue, you know, and you got a pay raise, you're going to continue trying to show up on time. Skinner strategically used positive and negative reinforcement to strengthen behaviors, and he used positive and negative punishment to weaken behaviors. Make sure you have good grasp on positive versus negative reinforcement and punishment. If you are putting on sunscreen, what is this an example of? 3, 2, 1. This is negative reinforcement. When you do the behavior such as applying sunscreen, you remove sunburn, okay? And you like waking up, you know, the next day without any sunburn, without that discomfort. So you will continue putting on sunscreen. What about when you finish a piece to a puzzle, right? So you're doing the alphabet puzzle and you finally figure it out. Oh yeah, this is where the C goes. That is positive reinforcement. Okay, when you complete that behavior, you got that good feeling. It was great. It was achievement. It was success. Okay, what about a speeding ticket? What is that an example of? Can there be positive punishment? You did an undesired behavior and they gave you something. They added something. Here's your fine. Here's your ticket. Shaping, as behavior is reinforced as it gets closer and closer to the desired outcome. My example in class was, you know, when I ask a question, I want you to sit quietly, raise your hand, and wait to be called on. Okay. Well, you blurt out the answer. You know, you got something to work on. You raise your hand and blurt out the answer. You still have something to work on. You raise your hand, you wait to be called on, and then you answer, boom, right? So it's the shaping every step of the way. Latent learning we only know takes place once we are asked to use it. Maybe some of these TikTok associations you guys keep going back to, maybe that's an example. As you're watching this TikTok, you don't really realize you're learning something, but then when we go over something in Psych, you're like, oh yeah, that's like on the TikTok, blah, blah, blah. Cognitive map is anytime you can use mental images of your surrounding to help you learn, to help you remember something. Social learning, Albert Bandura, the Bobo doll experiment. You guys should be pretty good on that by now, but we learn by observing the behavior of others. They model to us, teachers, siblings, older classmates. They're helping us learn. Taste aversion and aversive training. These are forms of conditioning. Aversion training, that is an undesired behavior being paired with an undesired stimulus, okay? You don't want to continue smoking. So we have to pair smoking with something undesired. Okay. So every time you smoke, you get shocked. Every time you smoke, there's something on the end of the cigarette that makes you sick. Okay. So that is an undesired behavior paired with an undesired stimulus like electric shock. Instinctual drift, that's the kind of stuff that happens, that's inherent. It's part of our DNA. It's our instincts. They're biological, right? That can interfere with conditioning. Dogs are trained. Dogs are conditioned to sit quietly, silence or sit down or quiet, whatever the prompt there is. But if somebody comes into the home that the dog doesn't know, it's probably going to bark. That's its DNA. That's its instinct. Okay. So instinctual drift is anything that happens that kind of interferes with conditioning. Token economies, you guys know, positive reinforcement to strengthen social behaviors, acting appropriately in school and getting petty cash. Exposure therapy. We didn't go over all of this. Exposure therapy, that is when you have some kind of phobia or some kind of stress or whatever, and you're exposed to it, right? If you have a fear of public speaking, you have to publicly speak in order to get over it, okay? If you have a fear of snakes, you have to be exposed to snakes to get over it. So it can be deeply uncomfortable, but it can be very successful. Exposure therapy is done in a safe environment. It's done with professionals, okay? You're not just thrown into a snake pit because you're scared of snakes. But slowly and easily and safely, you are exposed to whatever this behavior is you need to rectify. So again, replacing fear of snakes, public speaking, claustrophobia, you are exposed to that slowly, until it and it won't always work, but until it works. Now, in exposure therapy, a couple things to talk about is flooding. Okay, flooding used to be called implosive therapy, but flooding, that is a type of exposure therapy in which essentially you're thrown right into the fire. Okay, so you're scared of snakes. They bring in a snake and you're supposed to pet it or you're supposed to hold it. That's going to be overwhelming for a lot of people. Okay, so it's more or less, that's why implosive, you might implode, but you are flooding the person. You are throwing them into the deep end. You're throwing them right into the fire. It's not necessarily as safe as like exposure therapy. This is a little bit more obviously in your face and very direct. Now it can work, right? It can be successful or it can completely fall in place because you implode. Okay. But another one that would be easier would be systematic desensitization. That is similar to flooding. Except it's going to be easier. It's going to be more comfortable. Okay. It can be virtual. You might start by, the psychologist telling you to picture holding a snake, picture snakes crawling around you, or picture in your living room is an aquarium with a snake inside of it. Okay. So you don't have to be confronted by the snake itself, but you're imagining it, you're picturing it. Okay. But then you might go to a place that has live snakes. You don't have to touch or anything, but you're in the presence of snakes. And then maybe you work all the way up to touching it. Okay. Fear of large stores, I have on there. That was kind of the example they use. If you had a fear of large stores, picture yourself going into a small store, then picture yourself going into a large store, then picture yourself going through the aisles, then picture yourself having a full shopping cart and checking out. And then ultimately you're going to go to a small store. Then ultimately you're going to walk through the doors of a large store and go back out. Then ultimately you're going to walk into a large store and you're going to buy a candy bar and then walk out, so on and so forth. Okay. I'm going to try to stop there. Okay. So hopefully that was painless. Hopefully get that done. The AP Psych review for the weekend. I'm sure they're putting out another video this afternoon that I'll watch this weekend and then I'll send it your way. All right. Thanks, guys.